The member for Victoria Park.
It is our responsibility as the members in this Parliament to protect our most vulnerable assets. Of particular importance here in Western Australia is our long history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and our species-rich biodiversity. As such, it gives me great pleasure today to speak about the Conservation and Land Management Amendment Bill 2021. In 2015, through bipartisan support, we saw the joint vesting of national parks, nature reserves and conservation parks between the Conservation and Parks Commission and Aboriginal body corporates. This allowed traditional owners to voice any concerns relating to and have a say in the management of these natural areas. Given our First Nations' rich and deep history with country, this was a crucial move in providing these natural areas with the greatest chance of survival for all species to flourish on a landscape dominated by the Anthropocene. However, this history also has a strong connection to water. This bill, the Conservation and Land Management Amendment Bill 2021, allows for marine reserves to also be jointly vested with an Aboriginal body corporate, making them jointly responsible for the reserve's care, management and future. Joint vesting formally recognises traditional owners' interest in country by recording this relationship on the reserve title. It legally recognises a joint responsibility between the state, through the Conservation and Parks Commission, and traditional owners over land and, now, once this bill is passed, water. Aboriginal people along the Western Australian coast have a strong connection with their land and sea culture, and joint vesting will support the practice of culture and heritage, as well as participation in economic activities. The proposed joint vesting provisions in this amendment bill will provide an Aboriginal body corporate a role equal to the Conservation and Parks Commission in preparing the initial and every other proposed management plan, and review of each expiring management plan for the jointly vested land and water or waters. An equal role in being consulted on the granting of licences and leases on the jointly vested land and water or waters, and an equal role in being consulted on and providing advice to the Minister for Environment on proposals to cancel or amend the purpose of or change the boundary of certain types of CALM Act reserves which are not Class A reserves. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present and emerging, and communities maintain a strong connection to our waterways. These water bodies are central to many cultural and spiritual beliefs and have served as meeting places, boundaries between tribal and language groups, and sources of food, transport and shelter over tens of thousands of years. Importantly, Section 13B(1) of this bill recommends altering the reserve purpose of a marine park to specifically include the protection and conservation of the value of marine parks to the culture and heritage of Aboriginal people. By comparison, the current reservation purposes for marine parks in the Conservation and Land Management Act allow recreational and commercial activity that is consistent with the proper conservation of the natural environment, the protection of flora and fauna, and the preservation of any feature of archaeological, historic or scientific interest. While these frameworks are necessary and important to assist with protecting the physical environment, it does not account for places of cultural significance for Aboriginal people. The proposed amendment to the Act will allow for this fourth purpose: to justify protections of a place based on culture and heritage alone. This will provide the certainty that special purpose areas, referred to as special purpose zones in management plans, can be made for the protection and conservation of Aboriginal culture and heritage values. This will mean that special purpose zones will be able to be created through the marine park management planning process, in which activities that are not compatible with these Aboriginal culture and heritage values can be excluded. The amending of this Act in 2015 to include a share of responsibility and ownership with First Nations peoples did not include this connection to water on a cultural and spiritual level. It is crucial that we now incorporate this. The only people on this land and waters that have the benefit of tens of thousands of years of land and water management experience is our First Nations peoples. The proposed amendments will extend the 2015 jointly vesting arrangement and enable marine parks, marine nature reserves and marine management areas to be jointly vested in the same way as national parks, nature reserves and conservation parks. The intergenerational value of including traditional owners in land and marine park management will greatly benefit how effective our vital conservation efforts are. For too long, traditional owners were not included in the management of land for which they know every story. The McGowan Labor government acknowledges the importance of continual partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for sustainable conservation of all natural areas in Western Australia. This engagement has previously led to policy changes that have helped ensure the effective protections of our endemic species. A wonderful example of effective policy informed by the expertise of traditional owners is how traditional knowledge is informing prescribed burning. Fossil records show that Australian landscapes have been burned as a response to arid conditions for at least 30 million years. Our Noongar people here in the southwest of the state have used fire as one of the main tools in caring for country for tens of thousands of years. It has in fact been so integral to Noongar land management that the land we all inherit today is one that has been shaped by our Noongar peoples through their use of fire. With this history of knowledge, our burning practices today are now informed on the importance of cool burns to reduce the mass of understory organic litter, to protect the mid-range and higher canopy in fires of higher intensity, and maintain species richness to feed our local fauna through post-fire germination. A concept held by First Nations peoples is that country is a living entity, alive with ancestral spirits and must be respected. Our First Nations peoples relate to country the same way they would a person. If you look after country, country will look after you. As Yolngu elder Roy Dadanga Marika has said, "The land will exist forever. It must be protected so that it will remain the same, so that it can be seen in the same way that the elders saw it in the past. Our vision and hope is that Yolngu will continue to use the land for all the generations to come." In addition to joint vesting and informed prescribed burning, the Aboriginal Ranger program implemented by the McGowan Labor government has aided with the fostering of Aboriginal wellbeing and culture, along with improved environmental management and land restoration. And I am very pleased that over 50% of these positions are held by Aboriginal women. In addition, the McGowan Labor government also aims to increase the conservation estate in Western Australia by 5 million hectares over 5 years through new jointly managed parks and reserves. The corresponding agreement provides the joint management and joint vesting of the existing Ningaloo Marine Park, 260,000 hectares, and Cape Range National Park, 50,000 hectares, as well as the creation of about 78,000 hectares of new conservation areas extending over approximately 215 kilometres of the Ningaloo coast. The World Heritage listed Ningaloo coast is home to a range of biodiverse coral and fish populations and is frequented by whale sharks, humpback whales and even the occasional blue whale, the largest animal on Earth. Shared protection of these one-of-a-kind landscapes assists with safeguarding threatened species. The plan for our parks represents the single biggest expansion of the terrestrial conservation estate in Australia's history. This expansion will ensure the resilience of our environment against the impacts of climate change and other threatening processes, and includes extending the protection of the Buccaneer Archipelago Marine and National Parks in the Kimberley. Increasing the conservation estate by 5 million hectares is a big win for environmental sustainability, especially given the critical challenges we face in the age of human-induced climate change. The 5 million hectare expansion will see Western Australia's conservation estate increase by over 20%. Sharing these conservation efforts with traditional owners can only help our conservation and care of these natural areas. Aboriginal knowledge of land and waters and their connection to it should be celebrated and harnessed to ensure life within our waters and on our lands thrives. Extending these conservation areas and collaborating with traditional owners also provides a greater opportunity to focus on waste within these diverse areas. Reducing litter and inorganic materials such as plastics and metals can reduce deaths of species that are ingesting or getting caught in materials such as plastic bags, microplastics and holes in metal drink cans. The existence of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a collection of marine rubbish slowly breaking into microplastics, is reason enough to enact stronger protections on marine parks. Marine debris can be very harmful to marine life. Sea turtles often mistake plastic bags for jellyfish, and birds mistake plastic pellets for fish eggs and feed them to their young. The McGowan Labor government is already making globally leading strides in the waste field, such as our fast-forwarded ban on single-use plastics and the introduction of the Containers for Change container deposit scheme. Before Containers for Change, only 3 in 10 eligible drink containers were recycled. It is estimated that Containers for Change will result in an extra 6.6 billion containers being recycled over the next 20 years, of which an estimated 5.9 billion would have ended their life cycle in continuously expanding landfill, and 706 million would have been littered. 6.6 billion containers is enough to lap our vast state of Western Australia, laying containers side by side over 30 times. Containers for Change stretches all over our urban and rural state, which aids in keeping the pristine Kimberley all the way to the biodiverse southwest in its natural state, the way it should be. The Conservation and Land Management Amendment Bill will provide the basis for a new era in working with our state's traditional owners. Our land and waters is the well from which our First Nations culture and cosmology sprung. As Noongar man and former Chief Executive of the Southwest Aboriginal Land and Sea Council, Glenn Kelly, has written, "We are of this land and this land is of us. It has been that way for tens of thousands of years. Our knowledge base and cultural identity is closely intertwined with the land, and our people, especially our elders, still possess a vast pool of traditional knowledge. This, combined with our growing self-determination, mean that we are able to successfully fulfil our obligations to care for country, obligations that are set out in our dreaming. To care for the land, not only for ourselves, but for the sake of the health of country and all that lives upon it. We see this relationship as a reciprocal one. If we take care of the country and maintain its needs, it will in turn take care of us, both on a physical and spiritual level. We are equal to what exists on our land. We do not have dominion over it. We are simply custodians. I believe with the combination of Noongar traditional knowledge and modern scientific method, it will be possible to create an extremely robust and effective land management system, a cross-cultural land ethic, and that this can ensure the long-term survival of the land we now share. I couldn't agree more with Mr Kelly, and that the same applies to our waters. The Conservation and Land Management Amendment Bill 2021 is an election commitment of the McGowan Labor government to improve connections to country and bring about myriad positive economic, social and conservation outcomes for all the peoples of this land. It is a practical and far-reaching demonstration of how this government responds to the call to care for country. Like my colleagues, the members for Cockburn and Kingsley, who I listened to when they spoke to this bill in this place last week, I congratulate the Minister for Environment, Member for Morley Amber Jade Sanderson, on bringing this bill forward and early in this term of Parliament, and also her predecessor, the Honourable Stephen Dawson, for the work he did on this bill and in this space over the last term of Parliament and beyond. I am proud, as the Labor Member for Victoria Park, to commend this bill to the House.